All right, so get ready because today we are diving deep, and I mean deep, into the whole seeker versus avoider thing. And the best part, our source material this time around is a total curveball. Imagine peeking into someone's notes, like mid-thought, while they're building a course or a presentation. It's fascinating, really.
Hmm.
And thankfully, we have an expert with us to make sense of it all.
Yeah.
So skimming through this, it's clear our mystery source is really hung up on the big five personality traits. It's like that they keep coming back to it, trying to use it to explain this whole seeker-avoider idea they're building. What's the deal with that?
Well, they're onto something, that's for sure. In personality psychology, the Big Five model is HUGE. Basically, it suggests our personalities are shaped by five core dimensions: openness to experience, conscientiousness, extroversion, agreeableness, and neuroticism.
Okay, so kind of like everyone gets that basic personality template, and then these five traits, they're like the customization options.
Exactly. And what our source seems to be doing is trying to see how these traits, especially this thing about conscientiousness, play into their own seeker-avoider theory.
Because they specifically mention that people high in conscientiousness, they're all about mastery, consistency, competency, completion.
You got it. Order and achievement, that's their jam. But here's the kicker, and this is where it gets interesting. The source actually admits to struggling with consistency themselves. In fact, they said they find it painful, almost like they're battling their own personality blueprint.
Whoa, that is super interesting. So does this mean if I actually enjoy, like, checking things off my to-do list, which, for the record, I totally do. It's just my personality type doing its thing. What about people who find that kind of stuff soul-crushing? Where do they fit in?
It's not so much about being wired one way or another, but more like where you land on a spectrum. Think of it like a dimmer switch, not just on or off.
So you could be high in conscientiousness, low in conscientiousness, or somewhere in between,
Exactly.
meaning someone super organized, a meticulous planner, a real go-getter. They might be high in conscientiousness.
hmm
But then on the flip side, could that same person also struggle to relax, be flexible if things go off script?
You're getting it. And our source, they seem to be grappling with both sides of this. They're obviously driven, talking about loving the hunt for new knowledge and being goal-oriented. All signs point to some level of conscientiousness, but then they contradict themselves, saying they don't actually seek social acceptance.
Hold on. Wouldn't you think someone who loves that mastery feeling from nailing a goal, they'd also crave validation from others? Like, hey, look what I did. But the source is saying that's not a given.
It's a really good point. It does seem like they might be hitting some internal conflict here. Like they're trying to figure out how their desire for achievement can exist alongside this seeming indifference towards what others think.
So interesting. It's almost like they're trying to see if those two things can even like coexist. And this is where they bring in that whole seeker versus avoider idea, right? Like
Right.
it's the missing piece to this whole internal puzzle they're describing.
Yeah, it's like they're using this seeker avoider thing as a lens to like decode their own motivations.
Okay, so where does this connect back to the big five? Are certain personality types like predisposed to being seekers or avoiders?
That's what's so cool about how our source is like weaving these ideas together.
So someone really high in conscientiousness, for example, could that make them more likely to be a seeker since, they're all about those goals that drive for mastery?
Now, that is a fascinating connection. And you know what? It actually tracks with some psychological theories of motivation, too. Oh, yeah. Some believe we're mainly driven by going after those positive outcomes, those rewards we're seeking,
Makes sense.
while others think it's more about, like, dodging those negative ones.
Interesting.
Right.
Yeah.
Avoiding those pitfalls.
But then that brings us right back to that contradiction in our source's own thinking.
Yeah.
They're all about being a seeker when it comes to things like knowledge, goals, but not when it comes to social acceptance.
Exactly. And that's what I find so compelling about this deep dive. We're not just talking about theories here in some vacuum. We're seeing how they actually play out.
It's like real world application.
Precisely. In a real person's attempt to like understand themselves.
Because you'd think if someone thrives on that feeling of mastery, that rush from nailing a goal, they'd also be craving that validation from others.
Right. Like, check this out.
Exactly. But our source seems to be saying, hold on, not so fast.
And that's why it's so important not to oversimplify these things.
Oh, absolutely.
We can't just stick people in these neat little boxes, seeker or avoider, conscientious or not.
The world's not that black and white.
No way. Real life is way more, nuanced, more complicated than that.
It's like they're saying you can be a seeker in one area of your life and a total avoider in another.
Exactly. Spot on. And what we're seeing is that social interaction. That's a big one.
Oh, yeah,
Where those lines, they get really blurry.
for sure.
Think about it. Some people, they crave that social interaction, being surrounded by others, connecting with people. That's where they get their energy.
And then there are those who, for them, that's like their worst nightmare.
Right. They'd much rather, like, curl up with a good book, peace and quiet.
Totally.
Exactly. And neither one is right or wrong. It's just about, like, understanding your own tendencies.
Thanks, you tick.
Yeah, what truly motivates you, what gets you going.
Because our source even brings up this example of cooperating in a game, but not being driven by the social rewards it might bring.
Oh, interesting.
Almost like they're trying to convince themselves that they're not wired for that kind of connection.
Wow. See, that is a perfect example of how this whole internal struggle can play out,
Yeah.
They're trying to make their own behavior fit with how they understand these concepts.
Like second-guessing their own self-assessment.
Yeah, like, am I doing this right? It's
Yeah.
fast.
It's like they're saying, I'm cooperating, sure, but not because I want you to, like, pat me on the back or anything. Which is such a complex way to approach something as simple as a game. Okay, so we've got this fascinating paradox, right? Someone who's all in on being a seeker in some areas, but then shies away from those social rewards. It's like they're trying to squeeze into a box that just, I don't know, isn't quite the right fit. But then, and here's where our source takes this sharp turn, they start talking about tribes.
Yeah, and you're right. On the surface, it does seem like a bit of a jump. 1 minute, we're breaking down their whole approach to social interaction, and the next, bam, we're in the land of group dynamics, social structures, the whole shebang.
So how do we get there?
Well, they start reflecting on their experiences with church, which I think they're using as like a prime example of a tribe.
Mm-hmm.
And they talk about how these social structures, these groups we form, they can provide this sense of belonging.
Which brings us right back to that seeker-avoider dynamic, doesn't it?
Exactly.
Because finding your tribe, that sense of belonging for some people, that's got to be incredibly rewarding.
Oh, absolutely. It taps into that like primal human need for connection. And it makes you think maybe it's especially powerful for those who are like hardwired to seek out those positive social experiences.
But then they drop this phrase, and I got to admit, this is where I totally lost the plot. They call it empathetic joy.
Wow, empathetic joy.
Yeah, they bring it up like in the context of people messing up, making mistakes, but then nothing, no explanation. Did I miss something?
No, not at all. They definitely just threw that phrase out there, no context whatsoever. Like we were already in on their little brainstorming session.
Okay, good. Because I was starting to feel like I wandered into the wrong classroom or something.
Like, wait, what are we talking about again?
Exactly. So what is empathetic joy?
It's actually a pretty straightforward concept, which makes it even more fascinating, if you ask me. Empathetic joy, it's basically that ability to share in someone else's happiness, that warm and fuzzy feeling you get when you see someone you care about succeed or experience something positive.
So like if my best friend lands their dream job and I'm over the moon for them, even though it has zero to do with me directly, that's empathetic joy.
Exactly. Vicarious happiness. And it's a pretty wild emotion when you really think about it.
Because it means like setting aside your own ego and just genuinely celebrating someone else's win.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And it makes you think, how does this whole empathetic joy thing, how does it actually play out within those tribes our source is so curious about?
Right. Like, are people more likely to experience it in a group where they feel that super strong sense of belonging?
Yeah.
Where they're really invested in how everyone else is doing?
Now, those are the million-dollar questions. And honestly, they're things researchers are still trying to figure out. There's so much we don't know about how our social circles, our relationships, all of that, how it shapes our emotional experiences.
It's like our source is pointing out this whole other layer of complexity to their own seeker-avoider framework,
It really is, and it makes you wonder, are they starting to realize that maybe those lines between these categories, seeker-avoider, conscientious, not conscientious, maybe they're not as clear-cut as they thought at first?
Which might explain why they end this whole thought spiral with this, like, random call to action about making progress.
Right.
Didn't really tie back to anything, but maybe that's the point. Like they're saying, look, understanding all this stuff, what drives us, our little quirks, how we function socially, maybe that's the key to navigating the world in a way that actually means something,
It's like they're acknowledging that, hey, self-awareness, it's a journey, not a destination.
Oh, I like that.
Right. And even with all these frameworks, these labels we try to put on ourselves, there's always more to discover about ourselves, about how we interact with the world. everything.
Which I think is a perfect note to end on. We started this whole deep dive with what seemed like a pretty simple question. Are you a seeker or an avoider?
Hmm.
But wow, it turns out there's a whole lot more going on beneath the surface.
Always is, isn't it?
Touché. Well, on that note, a huge thank you to you, our expert, for walking us through this labyrinth of ideas. And to you, our listener, thank you, as always, for joining us on this deep dive. We'll catch you next time when we unpack another intriguing source and see what hidden gems we can unearth.